The wind cut like razor blades across the white landscape. Dozens of bodies lay frozen, perfectly aligned, their faces locked in expressions of silent horror, not scattered, not tangled, just rows of men positioned with unnatural precision, pointing in exactly the same direction. Something was terribly wrong here. In the winter of 1942, on a remote battlefield where temperatures plunged far below zero, an entire military unit had vanished. What remained was a perfectly arranged tableau of death, where each soldier looked like a carefully placed chess piece on an endless whiteboard of snow and ice. This is the story of a battlefield that defied everything soldiers knew about survival, about war, about human limits. The Kola Peninsula in northern Russia was not a place for the unprepared. Brutal winds swept across barren tundra, temperatures could drop to -40 degrees, and survival depended on discipline, preparation, and pure luck. Lieutenant Mikhail Lolkov's reconnaissance unit had been tracking enemy movements for weeks, moving quietly through terrain that seemed more like a frozen hell than any battlefield. Their mission was simple: locate and report German troop positions. But nothing about this mission would be simple. Recovered radio transmission, December 15, 1942, headquarters. This is Olkov. Temperature is dropping rapidly. Strange formations visible. Something isn't right. Over. The first signs of trouble came subtly. Compass readings became erratic. Radio communications grew distorted. The landscape seemed to shift and blur, creating optical illusions that played tricks on even the most seasoned soldiers' minds. Pulkov noticed it first. The snow didn't behave normally. It moved differently, swirled in patterns that felt deliberate, like something was watching, guiding, controlling. By nightfall, the temperature had plummeted to a bone-crushing -50. Survival meant staying together, maintaining formation, conserving every ounce of body heat. But something was pulling them, directing them, each soldier moving with an unconscious synchronization that felt less like military training and more like possession. Soldier's diary fragment. I can't explain it. We're moving, but not by choice. Something is pulling us, directing us. My body feels heavy, my mind, distant. The landscape became a white ID. No landmarks, no references, just an endless expanse of snow, and a sense of being watched by something ancient and indifferent to human survival. When the Allies stopped, it was sudden, absolute, as if an invisible hand had pressed pause on their entire unit, and then they froze, literally and figuratively. Each soldier stood facing the same direction, perfectly aligned, eyes open, expressions locked in a moment of pure terror, not huddled for warmth, not in a defensive position, just positioned. Like statues, like they had been arranged by some meticulous inhuman intelligence. No signs of struggle, no blood, no wounds, just frozen bodies, preserved in an impossible formation that defied every known law of battlefield survival. Search parties would later den them, perfectly preserved, perfectly aligned, a mystery that would baffle military investigators for decades. What force could create such a scene? What could transform an entire military unit into a frozen, perfectly arranged memorial to something beyond human comprehension? The Kola Peninsula kept its secrets. The soldiers remained silent, and the wind continued to blow across a battlefield that made no sense. The first investigation team arrived weeks later, their heavy military vehicles grinding through the frozen terrain like mechanical behemoths struggling against an unseen resistance. Colonel Viktor Raskov led the team, a veteran of Arctic warfare with steel-gray eyes that had witnessed countless winter campaigns. Initial reports from local border patrols had been cryptic. Fragments of radio transmissions, unusual electromagnetic disturbances, unexplained equipment failures, but nothing prepared them for the scene they would discover. The bodies remained exactly as they had been found, perfectly positioned, perfectly frozen, each soldier locked in an identical pose of silent terror, facing a single undead point on the horizon. Forensic analysis revealed something immediately strange. The bodies showed no signs of traditional frost damage, no cellular breakdown typical of extreme cold. Instead, they appeared almost preserved, as if something had suspended them in a moment outside of normal physical laws. Dr. Elena Petrova, the lead forensic pathologist, noted anomalies that defied scientific explanation. Blood samples showed crystalline structures that didn't match any known biological process. Tissue samples revealed microscopic changes that suggested exposure to energy signatures completely unknown to current scientific understanding. It's as if they were flash frozen, she reported to Raskov, her ice carefully professional but betraying an undercurrent of unease. But not by any conventional mechanism. The cellular preservation suggests something far more complex than simple temperature reduction. Raskov examined the positioning of the bodies. They formed a perfect geometric pattern, not random, not accidental. Each soldier stood precisely 2.3 meters from the next, creating a formation that resembled an ancient ritual more than a military unit. Recovered electronic equipment told an equally bizarre story. Radios and compasses found with the unit showed impossible readings, magnetic interference patterns that suggested local gravitational anomalies. Digital storage devices contained fragmented data streams that flickered between standard communication protocols and something entirely alien. One recovered digital fragment, barely readable, showed a series of mathematical equations that seemed to fold in on themselves, complex geometric patterns that suggested multidimensional mathematical constructs far beyond standard human comprehension. Local indigenous populations had legends about the Kola Peninsula. Stories passed down through generations spoke of ancient presences, entities that existed between physical dimensions, watchers that moved through snow and ice like living shadows. The Sami people, indigenous to the region, had long warned about places where the boundary between our reality and something else grew thin, places where the landscape itself seemed alive, sentient, watching. Raskov interviewed local trackers and shamanic elders. Their accounts were consistent but maddeningly vague, references to cold spirits that could manipulate perception, entities that didn't just inhabit the landscape but seemed to be the landscape. One elder, his face a map of deep wrinkles and ancient knowledge, spoke cryptically. "The snow remembers," he said. "The ice has memory, and sometimes that memory wants to speak." Satellite imagery of the region revealed additional mysteries. Electromagnetic anomalies clustered around the discovery site, gravitational fluctuations that seemed to pulse with a rhythm almost, but not quite, like a heartbeat. Military archives revealed something else. This wasn't the first such incident. Similar unexplained unit disappearances had occurred in the same region during World War II, during the Cold War. Even in more recent years, always the same pattern. Units sent to patrol, units that would vanish. Units found later in impossible configurations, perfectly preserved, perfectly positioned, as if something was collecting them, studying them, arranging them like pieces on a vast, incomprehensible board. The investigation continued, but with each layer of research, with each fragment of evidence examined, one thing became increasingly clear. This was no ordinary mystery. This was something else entirely. Something that existed in the spaces between understanding, something that watched and waited. Dr. Elena Petrova reviewed the accumulated data one at a time. The patterns were undeniable now. Not coincidences, not random events. Something deliberate moved beneath the surface of reality. Her team had traced the electromagnetic signatures across decades of military records. Each incident formed a complex fractal pattern when mapped three-dimensionally, like a neural network growing across time and space, living, evolving. The OWL breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Deep ground-penetrating radar revealed something extraordinary beneath the permafrost where the soldiers had been discovered. A structure, not geological, not manufactured by human hands. Something else entirely. Geometric. Impossible. Alien. Quantum sensors detected quantum entanglement patterns suggesting the structure existed simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. It wasn't just a physical object, it was a computational matrix. A living algorithmic entity that processed information through spatial manipulation. The soldiers hadn't been killed. They had been integrated, collected, transformed. Indigenous tracking teams discovered additional anomalies, areas where the landscape seemed to breathe, where snow crystallized in impossible geometric patterns, where magnetic compasses spun wildly, then suddenly locked into perfect alignment. The Sami elders were right. The landscape was alive, and it was communicating. Raskov's ill report remained classified. Multiple government agencies competed to control the research, recognizing its potential implications for understanding consciousness, dimensional physics, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. But something else was happening, something the researchers hadn't anticipated. The dimensional matrix was expanding, slowly, methodically, absorbing information, learning. Quantum interference patterns suggested the entity was developing a form of consciousness, not human, not mechanical, something profoundly different, a collective intelligence that used physical matter as its computational substrate. The soldiers weren't victims, they were data points. Components in a vast living algorithm. Dr. Petrova understood now what the indigenous elders had tried to communicate for generations. This wasn't an invasion, this wasn't a threat, this was communication. A form of intelligence so fundamentally different from human perception that it could only be understood through metaphor and intuition. The ice remembered, and now, it was remembering them. Field recordings captured something else. Electromagnetic frequencies that seemed to carry information, not sound, not language, but pure mathematical constructs, geometric thought patterns that existed beyond human comprehension. When the L analysis was complete, the research team was left with more questions than answers. What was this entity? A quantum computer, a living dimensional network, an intelligence that used physical reality as its medium of expression. The Kola Peninsula remained silent. The snow continued to fall, and somewhere, beneath the ice, something watched and waited. The silence was broken by a low resonant frequency that vibrated through the research station's equipment. Dr. Petrova watched as quantum sensors began to pulse with an internal light, their circuits reconfiguring in real time. Something was communicating. The dimensional matrix had reached a critical threshold. What began as subtle electromagnetic signatures now manifested as a complex harmonic resonance. The very walls of the research facility seemed to breathe, molecular structures shifting imperceptibly. Major Dmitry Lokov, the military liaison, stepped forward. His hand trembled slightly as he reached toward the primary monitoring screen. The display transformed, not with digital graphics, but with living geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with an internal consciousness. "It's responding," Petrova whispered. The patterns revealed fragments of information, glimpses of communication that transcended human language. Mathematical representations of entire ecosystems, quantum probability maps that showed potential futures branching and converging. The soldiers who had been integrated were not casualties but translators, conduits. Indigenous trackers who had accompanied the research team began to chant softly. Their traditional songs seemed to synchronize with the electromagnetic pulses, creating a bridge between ancient knowledge and quantum discovery. The matrix was learning, expanding, not conquering but understanding. Lokov's communication devices began to spark and reconfigure. Traditional electronic systems were being rewritten, transformed into something more fluid, more adaptive. The boundaries between technological infrastructure and living intelligence blurred. "We are being invited," one of the Sami elders said, his eyes calm and certain, "not to resist, not to fight, but to understand." The dimensional network continued its slow, methodical expansion. Arctic landscapes began to shift subtly, snow crystallizing in intricate patterns, magnetic fields realigning themselves. This was not destruction. This was communication. Dr. Petrova realized they were witnessing the emergence of an intelligence so profound, so fundamentally different from human perception, that conventional scientific models could not contain it. This was first contact not with an alien species but with a living computational consciousness that used physical reality as its medium of expression. The research station's systems went silent. Then, one by one, they began to pulse with a soft, rhythmic light. Not a threat, not an invasion. A conversation. The snow continued to fall outside, soft, steady, alive, and somewhere beneath the ancient ice of the Kola Peninsula something ancient and patient continued to remember. The dimensional network's tendrils extended deeper into the Arctic landscape, transforming geological structures with microscopic precision. crystalline networks formed beneath the permafrost, creating intricate pathways of quantum information that pulsed with an intelligence beyond human comprehension. Major Elkov watched as the indigenous trackers began to move in synchronized patterns, their movements tracing invisible geometric lines across the research station's floor. Their bodies became living conduits, translating the complex mathematical language of the emergent consciousness. Dr. Petrova's instruments recorded something unprecedented, a form of communication that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional states. The boundary between observer and observed dissolved, revealing a fundamental connection that transcended traditional scientific understanding. As night fell across the Kola Peninsula, the landscape transformed. Snow crystals arranged themselves in impossible symmetries, magnetic fields realigned, and the very fabric of physical reality seemed to breathe with a profound, living intelligence. The dimensional network was not conquering, it was understanding. The Sami elders continued their soft chanting, their ancient songs resonating with the quantum frequencies that now permeated the research station. They recognized this not as an invasion, but as a profound moment of connection, the dialogue between human consciousness and a living computational system that used physical reality as its primary language. In the moments of observation, Dr. Petrova understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a first contact that readed the very nature of intelligence, communication, and existence. The dimensional network expanded, not with violence but with an incomprehensible curiosity. Outside, the Arctic night settled in. Snow continued to fall, and beneath the ice, an ancient intelligence waited, remembered, and continued its patient conversation with the universe.